today I'll share some of the lessons I learned doing cochlear implant research and development in the last 30 plus years. And I'll say sort of three things. One is what drives basic research and what drives translational research, right? The second thing I'll say there's kind of interesting interplay between the two, and I will use cochlear implants as an example, to illustrate that interplay and its impact. And I think last I'll show you some very, very, very interesting new opportunities. And I said three very, 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 and I hope you would agree with me. All right, so when it comes to basic research, right, it's mostly driven by your curiosity. And you heard, I'm so thankful that Jeremy and Antoine gave the talk right in front of mine. So I'm going to go through this fantastic auditory structure with you. But I'll point out just one fact that if you go from the external ear, one side, ear canal one, and you have three middle ear bones. And once you get to the inner ear, and it just got exponentially more complex. And we have 3,000 inner hair cells. They're microphones, and each one of them being attached by about 10 nerve fibers. And once you get a nucleus, cochlear nucleus, and 10 times more, inferior cochlea, maybe you get to order of 1 million fibers. Once you get auditory cortex, well, that's another 10 or 100 times more. So why do we need that expansive neural network up and down? And I'm not even talking about the feedback. There's as many fibers, feedback efferents as afferents. But why do we need this kind of structure? Well, I'm an engineer, right? So just say, hey, it performs something that we call system specifications. And I'll just list some of the things in 3 dimensions. Our ear can deal with the sounds as a soft, let's say 1 nanometer vibration. It's about the diameter of the hydrogen atom, right? It's close to Brownian motion. That's the soft sounds you can hear. But the loudest sound you can tolerate is 12 orders of magnitude higher. You put 1, you have to add 12 zeros after that. So the dynamic range is humongous. And you also look at the frequency resolution or pitch, right? And you can discriminate, not you, trained musicians, they can discriminate pitch difference between 1,000 and 1,001 hertz, 0.1%, okay? And I can do maybe 5 hertz, 1,000 and 1,005. I need the training to approach that. And the third dimension is time, right? And if we can, a sound straight come from front, I move it by 1 degree, and which will generate about a 10 microsecond difference, 10 microsecond difference between the 2 ears. And we can tell that the sound is moved a little bit. Students, imagine, my action potential is about 1 millimeter in width. How can you discriminate a time difference 100 times less, 10 microsecond, right? I'm still thinking about that. Right. So why do we need this kind of fine resolution? Well, I can tell you, it's not to let you understand speech like what I'm doing right now in quiet. Well, it's to let you appreciate Beethoven's 9th Symphony. You got about 100 musicians playing different instruments and 100 people singing, right? And if you pay attention, you can hear the first violin, you can hear man or woman's voice. And that's why we developed such dedicated and complicated auditory system, so you can appreciate music. But when it comes to translational research, it's motivated mostly by the need. So, we always say, hey, why do we develop neuron prosthetics? For speech, you heard this morning, right? For people who are paralyzed, right? Well, deafness, and we look at these numbers, right? It's the highest percentage of birth defect. Every 500 babies, you have one born with deafness. For veterans coming back from a war, every war, the number one disability is hearing related, hearing loss or tinnitus, right? And recently you heard about dementia, right? Alzheimer's disease. The highest risk factor is hearing loss. If we can prevent hearing loss or alleviate the hearing loss, and there's good chance we may prevent Alzheimer's disease and dementia, etc. It costs a lot of money. But I think what I want to show you next is this picture, right? Anybody recognize who this person is? No? Give it a try? Well, I remember when I was young, when I grew up in China, I read the Helen Keller's book. That's Helen Keller, right, who's both blind and deaf. And what she said was that blindness isolates me from objects. Deafness isolates me from people, right? It's communication. We use spoken language, to talk to our friends. But maybe things are a little bit different now, and we text each other. So it's about the quality of life. And so far, the only medical intervention that can treat deafness, cochlear implantation. No, nothing else, right? We're talking about total deafness. But if you go back and look at the history of cochlear implant development, and this is the second part, I'm trying to get into the interplay. And you saw the title. Sometimes the science can actually hinder translation. And I showed a picture, Dr. Bill House. He is an ENT surgeon. He actually heard the stories actually happened right in Paris here, DiGiorno and Aries. I think in 1957, put an electrode wire in a deaf person's ear, and the person could hear sound. And that news spread it across Atlantic to the United States. Nobody in Boston or New York wanted to do anything. And Bill House in Los Angeles, he heard about it, said, maybe we can develop a device to help deaf people hear. And that's what he did. And his first device was so simple that you don't have to be engineered to understand and appreciate. It's just a coil on the bottom. A coil has 2 wires. One is a ground. The other electrode you put inside the inner ear or cochlea. We call it single channel cochlear implant. And of course, outside there's another coil delivering amplitude modulated speech. And he worked with 3M and I got FDA approval in 1985 or 84. And that was the first medical device that was approved by FDA to treat deafness, right? But what he got from the mainstream scientific community was the following. I'll show you a few examples. Hal Schucknecht was the chairman of the ENT department at Harvard University. And what he said about Bill's cochlear implant was that otology needs a new operation, but this is not it. Right? Another famous physiologist from Germany, Rainer Klink, he said from a physiological point of view, cochlear implants would not work. It's as simple as that, right? And there's other people from deaf community, linguistists, jumped on Bill House, right? He was the guy stood there by himself, right, against the oppositions from the authorities in the field. Says it's not going to work, right? And it took him a lot of courage, right, to develop this device. And I'll show you, of course, there's limitations with that single channel device. But somebody else says, if we can put a 1, maybe we can put a 2, 3, 4, and people put a 20 or so electrodes into the inner ear. And all of a sudden, we had a very vibrant market. And right now, there's over 1 million people who couldn't hear before. Now they could. Half of them are post-lingually deafened adults. And now they can carry on conversation with their cell phone without help of lip read. The other half are pre-lingually deafened children. Pre-lingually deafened children means they were born with the deafness. And without cochlear implants, they would have gone to the deaf-mute school. Without hearing, you cannot talk either, right? But with the cochlear implants, most of them, if not all, have entered the mainstream school. So I don't know whether there's any deaf schools in France, in US, and the last one, west of Mississippi, closed 2 years ago because there's no more deaf student to educate. All right, and I think I love this one. This is a break the stigma associated with the deafness. This father whose child got a cochlear implant, and he shaved his head and put a cochlear implant, a tattoo. Right? It's pretty cool, right? And I'll just do some comparisons. When we said, hey, cochlear implants are the most successful neuron prosthesis. Oh, here's the data to back it up. Just look at how many people benefited from it. 1 million and counting, right? And you look at the next one, we talk about spinal cord stimulation. I don't know anyone doing that for treatment of pain, and it's very controversial. And there's about over 1,000 deep brain stimulation for treatment of Parkinson's disease mostly, right? And retina implant, right? And I'll show you a slide a little bit later. That broke my heart. There's a little bit less than 1,000 people benefit from a retina implant, but there's no companies doing that right now. Now the interplay, right? Remember the mainstream scientists were against the cochlear implantation. But once you got so many people, and I think the turning point I'll show you is they actually, we use cochlear implants to help us make scientific discoveries. And I'll show some examples. When I got into the field in 1990 in Los Angeles, working with Bill House and Bob Shannon at the House Ear Institute in Los Angeles. And at that time, I was a trained engineer, psychophysicist. And people at that point thought, the brain is a very linear device. And I'll give you some quotes. S.S. Stevens, right, another famous psychologist at Harvard. And he said, it's a peripheral sensory organ imposes power transformation between man and word. And he has a law. He called it Stevens' power law. I don't know any of you guys heard about it. I know mostly doing molecular biology and electrophysiology. And his psychophysical power law says there's a power function transformation between stimulus and your sensation magnitude. That applies to sound intensity, loudness. That also applies to light intensity and brightness, temperature, even the degree of beauty. If you do the ranking, abides by the power law. But he thinks that power law is happening in the organ, the peripheral organs, sensors, not in the brain. And of course, some of the familiar names, and you heard about from Eccles, Moncasso, etc., they all believe this linear transform, or the power transformation happens in the the nonlinear stuff happens in the transducer, not the brain. And we actually thought, okay, if the brain were linear, right, and we got a cochlear implants, the cochlear implants bypassed the entire cochlea. We stimulated auditory nerve directly. Therefore, we would expect a linear function between electrical intensity and loudness. If that power transformation happened in the ear, well, and we did that experiment, and to our surprise, they had exponential function. So the loudness is an exponential function of electric intensity. It's not a linear function, right? And we think it had a lot to do with what I just said. There's exponential structure going from the ear to the brain, right? And this is a manifestation of that expansive growth of the sensory system. So the brain is not linear, right? And it's actually a lot more than that. It's not quiet, it's not passive, it's not static. The brain actually is active, it's plastic, right? And I'll tell you, some of the other things I'm working on. Tinnitus, it's generated sound. You heard about a sound in the absence of external stimulation. There's sound in your head. And there's probably 50 people here. It's probably a fact 10 or 15 of you guys, right? And you hear sound in your head. Where does that come from? A linear passive system will not be able to generate something from nothing. Has to be a nonlinear active system. And of course, I'll show a couple of pictures. The people who kind of started this brain plasticity, and Mike Merznick and Norm Weinberger. And it's just a coincidence, and Richard Anderson is here, and so is Sean Mark, and they're their advisors long time ago, right? When Mike and Norm, they may not like each other in person, but they both believe the brain is not static at all. It's very plastic. And I had the chance to work with the both of them. And if we say, looking back right now, the success of a cochlear implant, at most, I would say half of it attributed to us engineers. The other half, or perhaps more, attributed to the plasticity in the brain. We delivered, and I'll show you in a couple of simulations, a very crude acoustic signal. And even the transformation through the cochlear implant is still very crude. Somehow, your brain adapts and learns that signal. And of course, a lot of theories, but I said, okay, it's the data that walk, right? We have to see what the data you have. And that's one of the things Sean Mark mentioned earlier on, right? And, when Bob and I, we look at these, we're thinking about sort of like Gupla and Eddie Chan, we want to look at this forming transition. This is a spectrogram. Look at the top right. You can see, there's harmonic structures in the different lines, and you can see there's changing frequency, which is the y-axis, and that's original speech spectrogram for a sound called a shoe cat. And we can just extract the change in intensity and modulated noise. And the bottom one is modulated to a white noise. So you can get the change in the intensity of the sound, but there's no spectral details compared with the top one, right? And earlier on, we're trying to think, how can we deliver that harmonics, that formants, resonance frequency in speech, that forming a transition to cochlear implants? That didn't work. The implant performance wasn't that great. And what surprised us, just say, how much spectral information do you need to understand speech? Well, the answer is not a whole lot. 3 channels, maybe 4, you can understand speech. Look at the sentence recognition on the right. Percent correct, 100% as a function of the number of channels. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just look at 3 and 4 and compare with the original spectrogram. There's no spectral details whatsoever. But still, we can understand. This is in quiet, 100% speech. So that really changed how we not only understand speech, but the design of a cochlear implant. Our ears, when it comes to speech perception, right, we can focus on the temporal aspect. It will be very difficult, if possible at all, to replicate the dedicated structure of these 3,000 tuned microphones. I mean, remember I said most we can get is like 20 or 24 electrodes inside. We better focus on the temporal aspect. And this is what we did. And I'll see whether the simulation works. I'll let you hear a simulation, which is a simulate one channel, we call it vocoded speech. And of course, you can see it's 0% open set recognition. I'll say some word and what count numbers. You can watch my lips. I hope it's not too loud. Let's give it a try. A little bit louder. Can you turn up the volume a little bit? Or maybe I can do it here. I'm a Mac person. This is a PC. So where's that volume control? Volume control is... Okay, I got it. You can try again. Okay. Thank you. Without liberating, you don't understand anything, right? That's what the single-channel cochlear implants were for, right? I mean, you see that there's a little bit of discrepancy between this mic and the sound. I don't want to blow up your ears. But with these 4 channels, I'll let you hear again. So if you could boost the volume a little bit, I don't have to do liberating. You can appreciate or understand most of it. Let's try again. So this is I mean, I understand that the quality wasn't that great, and the music sounds horrible, right? But that's what allowed people carry on conversation, right, on telephone, and the children develop language. That's very, very important. And then we said, okay, if we say we can build a device with such simple, and the cochlear implants were very expensive, about $50,000 per, right? And I say we look at if we go to Sub-Sahara African countries, and the annual income, the whole family annual income is $500. If they can afford one cochlear implant, it would take them 100 years without eating or buying new clothes to get that implant. I mean, that's definitely impossible for them to do. So I thought, hey, maybe we can develop an affordable but still high quality cochlear implant. Right? This is a very translational stuff. I tried it a couple of times. First time failed, and second time, well, this is what we did. Was we used the Apple model. The older Apple, if they said designed in California, made in or assembled in China, right? And so you can have quality and also low cost. And it took us, maybe $50 million and 3 years. So, made a low cost implant, but still very high quality. And I think what I'm very proud, I know some of you guys are interested in developing a product as the need, right? Well, it's a price. The Chinese government, just like the UK, France, they purchase the cochlear implants for children, right? And initially, before we got into the market, it's about $40,000 per cochlear implant. We got in at 2012. After that, you can see the price just dropped like a rock and stabilized about $3,000 or $4,000. And that's something that is super, super important. 10 years ago, you spend the same $40,000, you helped one child, and now you can help 10, right? And I think when it comes to translational research development, you really have to know the market, what the real needs are, and you have to be smart enough to make something that matches that market's needs, right? And this is another business class lesson that I don't have time to talk about. I said I'll show you a slide about the retina implant, right? And the second slide is a company founded by the same entrepreneur, Al Men, and he just transformed cochlear implant into retina implant, and worked okay. And they tried to develop in a high density, and that's where they fail. And they implanted about 600 people worldwide. And guess how much they sell per device? I said a cochlear implant is $50,000. How much do you think, Valerie, would you guess the retina implant? Not that much, yeah. $150,000, right? And they sold about 10 or 20 per year. And their R&D cost up to FDA approval was $250 million, right? If you sell 10 or 20 per year, right? It's not going to be sustainable. So, this is was a national news. Said second side left the users in the dark again, and that's generated a lot of problems. And the research I only heard about it, FDA is thinking about requiring the startup companies putting in some kind of security, insurance money, in case like that, so their users will be taken care of. But for those of us who have done startups, it's so hard already to raise money to support your startups. And you're asking the startups to set aside money to pay for insurance. And I don't think it's sustainable at all. But I do believe that there's a room for a retina implant, right, to play a role to help address the blindness issues. And of course, then I look at even in cochlear implants, it's field itself, and this is something that I plotted out on the y-axis is the number of publications per year, right? And you can see just like it grows exponentially. This is the blue curve, right? And we have 1,000 publications per year. The total R&D investment is like $200 million, and maybe students didn't think how much it will cost to publish one paper. What would you say? How much per paper? Yeah, I mean, the ballpark number 200K. Personnel cost is the most, right? So 1,000 papers, a lot of money. But you look at the quality, right, the performance. After 1995, we have not improved cochlear implant performance. And that's why Bryce, Anton, trying to do that cortical stimulation. I said, yes, please do, right? But I also had the chance, to talk, with Sarge Pico yesterday. There's a different approach to address this lack of spatial resolution problem in neural-machine interface. Right? We talk about optogenetics. You heard about it. We talk about optoacoustics, right? And Richard, you heard we talk about that yesterday, ultrasonic, and gene therapy. Gene therapy made big time news this year. In February, a conference in Anaheim, 5 companies, 2 from Europe, 2 from China, 1 from US, announced that they have a single injection of autof gene into a certain group of patients, and it restored hearing in 12 of them. And so if you haven't followed me on LinkedIn, this is my LinkedIn post. So, listen to that. I was right there in the front row, asked a bunch of questions. I wrote an article and published 3 days later. That's probably the fastest scientific publication I ever had. So this is the 2 papers coming out as a result of that gene therapy. It's just single dosage, single injection of autof gene in patients who lack that gene, right? It's a beautiful model. And this is one example, right? And it's audiogram, and if you're deaf, you have 100 dB loss. And this person, high frequency, that's where it is, a little bit low frequency hearing. But 2 weeks, restored quite a bit. 3 months after that single injection of autophagy gene in the inner ear, they're almost back to normal. Hearing-wise, you can hear the softer sound. So the question was, well, can they understand speech? What about, remember I told you in the beginning, the frequency discrimination, this temporal resolution, have they restored that? And you heard from Antoine, there's a lot of things about the temporal processing. Our ear is a very interesting organ, and it's not built to hear sound. Our auditory system is built to understand speech, appreciate music, right? So I went to 10 of the patients were in China. So I went back to China last month. I saw 5 of them, and I tested 4. And here's the result. And it was not published anywhere, and share some of it. This is something that I know very well. I worked with Arnie Starr, father of auditory neuropathy, with autophagy gene deficit is one of the causes of auditory neuropathy. A simple measure of temporal processing is a gap detection. And the task is very simple. Just say, give you a sound. You heard it? It's like 1 or 2. Well, you can hear 2 sounds. And let me just do it again. So if there's a 100 millisecond gap, right? You heard it. If there's a 1 millisecond, you don't. This is our normal control. When the sound is very soft, you need about a 20, 30 millisecond gap to hear a gap. But when sound is loud, 1 or 2 milliseconds. Okay? And then we run a bunch of auditory neuropathy papers. That was a long time ago when I did the experiment. People who have a mild neuropathy, to people who have a profound neuropathy. They can still hear a gap when the gap was like a 20, 30, even 100 milliseconds. What about the 4 patients I tested? Patient number 1. This is the people, they can hear sound okay, but they still, at a very relatively loud sound, they still need 3 or 4 milliseconds. I would say this is they restored hearing, but they have not restored, the gene therapy has not restored temporal processing. They still have a mild. And the second patient, it's moderate. And we have a 4.5 years old. It's hard to work with them. So we did just 1 data point. One of them pretty good, about mild. The other, when we even presented that 100 millisecond gap, she said, oh, I hear 1 sound, not 2, right? And all of them have a relatively normal hearing defined by audiogram. But when we test their temporal processing, so gene therapy has not totally restored temporal processing. Whether it's the peripheral problem, like Antoine Bryce showed, synapses still not perfectly, or there's a central issue, we don't know. So that's very interesting. So I'll go back more often to test out. To sum it up, I'll say, well, when translational development, you're trying to develop a device. The goal is just to meet the need. Forget about what a scientist told you, whether it's going to work or not. Even they say in your face, it's not going to work. Well, prove them wrong, right? But we also have to realize that you will not get a perfect device. And that difference between whatever the product you have, like cochlear implants today, and the restoration of normal hearing, is still a huge gap. And that gap has to be filled by our understanding of the basic mechanisms, and that will require basic research, right? But I'll just share the final 3 rules to develop a real product for real people in the real world. First, do no harm. has to be safe. Safety is the most important thing in medical device, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect. So I saw the talks yesterday, today. They are mostly good enough, but as long as you control the cost, they're willing to pay for the benefit with that much money, and you're going to have a sustainable business. That's very important. You got to survive for your benefit and for your patient's benefit. Thank you very much.